Malibuca and Merstach finished second overall in the Season 21 FNCS Grand Finals. They won consecutive games on day one, so I'm going to show you how they found the refresh that basically got them their first win, and how in the very next game they predicted every single zone correctly to go back to back and become just the 6th EU team to achieve this in an FNCS final. Let's start at the logical place, the very start of their games. As most of you probably know, they were landing at East and South Loot Lake, and Tayson Chapix and Podosai Exuis were having a 50-50 off-spawn battle in every single game very nearby. Many people said that this would be free surge and third parties for Malibuca and Merstach, but it didn't really work out that way. Because the fights tended to finish so quickly and often behind a building, the only way they would get anything would be to happen to land on a ranged weapon and then hope that the fight happened in their sightlines, and even then they would only get a couple of tags and very occasionally a lucky elim. By the time the fight finished, it was generally too late to push in because they either didn't have enough loot yet themselves, or the other team would have got enough loot by the time they arrived. It was not something worth pushing, especially when you know it's Tayson and Chapix you're up against. Anyway, in Game 5, which was their first win, we did see them move north towards the surviving team, so why was that? To see why, we are going to rewind and show you the problem that they had in their earlier games. They were uncontested, with a lot of loot, and were generally in the first zone due to their mid-map position. They barely got any damage in the first few minutes, and then rotated to the centre of the first zone. Malibuca spent a lot of time splitting off to create new bases and refarming, while Merstach stayed up top getting tags on people. Now those are great tactics that would have put them into the endgame with amazing mats and heals every single game in almost every tournament. But with the cutthroat new Storm Surge rules in place, and Grand Finals always requiring a lot of surge damage anyway, it was leaving them in danger of going below the damage thresholds, and they actually died to Surge in Game 3. If you don't get damage off spawn, and you don't have enough teams around you in Zone 1, and also don't both put all your time into getting damage after that, it's tough to keep up with everyone else in that department, even if you have insane aim like they both do. For sure, the centre of zone was better in this final if you could get enough surge. They just didn't always manage to do that. Now we can go back to Game 5, the game that they won, and I do wonder whether part of the reason they might have pushed over to the surviving team was because they wanted a bit more early damage when possible, all related to avoiding surge issues later. Another possible reason is that this was the first game that Podosai and Exuis won off spawn. I don't know whether they could see that in the kill feed or not, or just recognise the skins, but if I knew which duo survived, it would definitely affect my next move. Even though they ended up not getting much damage out of it due to their opponents escaping through a toilet, they did gain a lot of extra control over the area. After looting probably more than even they needed, Malibuca sets up a large base on the hill nearby, which is in the centre of first zone. He brings some extra heals up with him, which allows them to restock their heals when they trade surge tags. At this stage of the game, they're basically now guaranteed to be in second zone, and therefore should be able to end second zone with max mats and heals, a great start to the game. They made their only big mistake of this game in Zone 3. They had better position than everyone else to get to the zone early and enough surge for now, but instead they stayed up high in their base until the storm was almost upon them. Merstach got knocked, and they were suddenly in big trouble because their opponents pushed in and the storm was arriving. Now anyone can overpeak and get knocked by mistake, but they had put themselves in a situation where getting knocked at that time would be really bad, and unfortunately that's what happened. Thankfully they recovered the situation and got into the next zone via their drop spot, which gave them an opportunity to top up their resources a little bit. We go forward now to the next important moment, which was going into moving zones. Now during moving zones, the best single indicator of how well a team is doing is their materials, and you see that they were ranked 10th out of 20 teams at this time. It's not terrible, but also not set up to win yet. It's an awkward water zone that could get hilly later, so as a low ground team with a few mats, the best place to be is the front side. There is another important reason why the front side of the first moving zone can be very powerful in certain situations though, and here it is. Malibuca finds a pile of mats that gains them 86 builds. Is this luck? In some ways yes, it won't always happen, but why was it more likely that they would find this than it might initially seem? Firstly, they were front side and ultimate low ground, so they will always be the first team to get to anything that is there. Secondly, if we show you where the third zone was, you will see that there were many teams based up in this exact place and moving through it, so the chance that there was some random loot lying around was very high. I'm not sure whether they realised this at the time, but it's something you can bear in mind when you think about the advantage that frontside low ground might give you. And thanks to this, when first moving zone finished, they had 151 builds, which was enough to have the joint most mats in the lobby out of the 17 teams. Suddenly, they were in a great position to win the game. Through second moving, they saved some more mats by moving quickly through old builds, and then they could look up and see that height was single tarping. A quick spray upwards gave them the chance to take height, and this was effectively executing the winning move. With height and the most mats, they managed to close it out with Merstach winning a nice 1v1 against Swag. So that was their first win, and we move on to their second, which was of course game 6 of the grand final. As I said earlier, they got every single zone in this game. They never had to move after seeing a zone, until the moving zones of course, and I'll show you how they did this. After looting up as usual, they rotated to a place further into the first zone away from the edge where they could refarm wood and start to get surge tags on anybody based up nearby. Then they hear and see a fight going on nearby at a reboot van, which can often mean solos and free limbs, damage and loot. Chari is left alone as a solo by the time they arrive and doesn't stand a chance once they notice him. An extra 2 points and more surge damage is a nice gain for them. Now comes the positioning side of things. Their final Zone 1 base is at the mid-map gas station, which is extremely near the centre of the zone, and if you've watched my zones videos, you'll know that the very centre of zones 1 to 3 are guaranteed to be in the next zone. So when second zone appears, it's no surprise that they are in it. However, you might think that they could stay here and utilise the base that they already have, but they don't. They're thinking ahead to the next zone. Staying out of trouble is so important in stacked grand finals lobbies, so they would rather just head to the centre of second zone and guarantee the third zone. In the end, they are still rotating once for every zone, but they are rotating at completely different times to everyone else and way ahead of them, so it's extremely free. That feeling people have when they're on edge zone, boxed up next to 3 other teams and struggling to move forward without being held from every angle, well, it just doesn't exist for Merstach and Malibuca. And once they get to the centre of second, it's time for Malibuca to refarm. During that time, Merstach stays up top and keeps their surge going. At this stage, they already know that they'll be in third zone with max mats. All those early rotations to centre zones have got them to fourth zone with almost max materials and good heals, without having to box fight anyone or even get a proper refresh at all. The 50-50 zone is a lucky one for them. If you watched my third zones video, you'll know that the best you can do with predicting 50-50 is around a 17% chance, so they do have luck on their side this time. In terms of moving zones, they were so stacked on mats that they could play their usual playstyle of low ground and frontside where possible. They know that they can play out their mats for a top 10 pretty much already, so there's no random jumping in on anyone or dropping people down into their boxes. They wait for advantageous opportunities rather than taking 50-50s. Unfortunately, in the final zone, Merstach makes a little mistake in not owning the roof above him and gets taken out. As a duo, they still had 78 builds at that point, which was the most in the lobby by a long way, but they got caught nearer the back of the zone and couldn't own everything around them. Thankfully, Malibuca had the majority of the builds and carried on, using splashes to spend time back in the storm, and those splashes were actually carried all the way from their off-spawn in Loot Lake, showing how their drop spot was still helping them this late in the game. After utilising his remaining mats well to stay safe, he gets to a 1v2 situation where he hits a couple of ridiculous and great shots on Joe while taking control of the tiny zone area to win the whole game as the Andy goes down to the storm. I hope you enjoyed this review of their gameplay. Please go subscribe to their channels in the description below, and of course my channel too if you want to see more of my content. See you next time.